Wait, if you're a millennial, don't throw away those eggshells just yet. We're going to talk about why in just a second on today's episode of Short Stories of Bacteria. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Short Stories of Bacteria. I, as always, am your host, Dr. K, and I'm here to guide you through yet another story, chronicling the lives of the tiny and infamous, and that would be, of course, this incredible and amazing and fascinating bacteria. I have such a cool story to tell you today. You're probably already like, well, gee, Dr. K, I already know that eggshells are really important. You already told us in a previous episode talking about compost, or maybe I saw this on the interwebs previously, that you should take eggshells and you should put them in compost, and it's really, really, yes, you're very, very smart. Good job. But we're going to go a little bit deeper and a little more specific with this particular story. But before we jump into that, a couple different things I want to highlight right out of the gate. First of all, it is about that time of year where people start to do the whole graduation thing. So I wanted to offer a heartfelt, sincere congratulations to all the graduates, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Congratulations. Congratulations to you, congratulations to your families, and all the other folks that helped you get to this point. I know that you put in an ungodly amount of work getting to this point, and I'm super, super, super proud of you. So heartfelt congratulations. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're already listening to this YouTube, and maybe if you already saw the previous episode on compost, you should probably hit that like, share, subscribe button while you're here. It really helps support the channel. If you're listening online, don't forget to, if you're listening on something like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, if you could hit that follow button as well, that'd be awesome. It really helps support the channel and the podcast, and allows me to bring really cool stories to you guys. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's focus on this story. Now, I guess the best way I want to start this story is by talking a little bit about gardening. So I myself, for the first time really in my whole life, have really started to get into gardening, right? My wife and I were doing things like peppers, we're doing things like tomatoes, we're doing, what else are we doing? We have asparagus, we have onions, we have potatoes, which we're going to talk about in greater detail later on, but really, really getting into gardening. It's really cool. Now, what's really neat, actually, is that during the pandemic, there was this huge spike in terms of people who were starting to do personal gardening, right? Maybe it was because everyone was kind of locked into their area and they're like, okay, I got to get some kind of skill, may as well do gardening. Or maybe they were like, geez, I'm worried for the next type of apocalypse. I'd really like to be self-sufficient, or at least try to be self-sufficient in terms of the food that I'm producing, right? And for whatever reason, there was this huge spike in terms of people that were starting to do personal gardening. 18.3 million people in America alone started to do their own gardening, which is really, really cool. Now, if you break down that population a little bit more, you'll find that it's actually, and this is why I mentioned millennials specifically at the top of the episode, millennials had the hugest spike in terms of starting their gardening. Gen Z, they did an awesome job as well. They had a 44% increase in terms of people that were starting their own garden. But millennials, they actually had a 65% increase. That's a wild, wild increase. And this is all during the course of the pandemic. So that's really, really cool. So people are gardening a lot more. That's the first major point. People are gardening a lot more, but millennials in particular, I'm wanting to speak to, right? Millennials in particular, they're doing a lot of it, right? So that's really, really neat. Now, this is really, really awesome and all. But if you're starting to do gardening, and I've run into this already, and I'm sure those of you guys who are gardening have already seen something similar. In spite of the fact that we're all doing gardening now, or a lot of people are doing gardening, you run into the issue, and that issue, of course, because this is Short Stories of Bacteria, is bacteria, right? There's an ongoing battle between plants and between bacteria. Bacteria, as always, want to grow and spread over everything and then just keep on growing. That's really great. Plants, like we, do not want to be overrun by bacteria to the degree where they're just killed or anything like that. So they have to develop mechanisms of repelling bacteria, right? Now, bacteria, they have a bunch of really, really cool mechanisms to try and to get into things like plant cells and things like this. There's this really cool like Trojan horse thing where they kind of like blew a hole through. That was one neat story from a long time ago. Plants, on the other hand, they're mass producing antibiotics and all these other different mechanisms as a way of repelling bacteria. So there's this ongoing arms race between bacteria and between plants. Now, in particular, I want to focus in on potato plants, right? Number one, because I have potato plants, so that's very, very cool. And number two, because this paper relates to potato plants. Now, there's something called potato blight, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It is a blight upon potatoes. It kills tons of potatoes all the time. and it is caused by bacteria. And this bacteria is called, here we go, guys, Ralstonia solanacearum. So we're going to call it Ralstonia for short because that's a lot easier than the second half of that name. And what Ralstonia does, again, is it causes this potato blight. Now, I hate blight in my potatoes. I'm sure you hate blight in your potatoes. And so there's a lot of questions out there for all the different kinds of gardeners that are like, okay, is there a way that we can prevent blight from occurring in potatoes? Or is there a way that we can make these potato plants more resistant to something like potato blight? That's a really, really good question. Now, as it turns out, in this paper that came out of, let me look, University of the Republic in Montevideo, Uruguay. That's really cool. So that came out a couple months ago. So it just recently got published. And what it was doing is it was trying to answer this question of, is there a way that we can make potato plants a little bit more resistant to potato blight? Right? So the researchers said to themselves, okay, we can be very smart about this. We're very, very smart researchers, the researchers said. And they said, all we have to do, right? And then we can specifically focus in on like the mineral content. Well, all we have to do is we have to look at a bunch of plants that are resistant to potato blight, and then we analyze the mineral content of those potatoes and compare them to the ones that are not resistant to potato blight. And then what we can do is we can say, gee, maybe there's one mineral in particular that we need to have present, or maybe there's one mineral in particular that we need to pull away as a mechanism of making them more resistant to potato blight. That's what the researchers, I'm sure, said. They were like, gee, good job, researchers. We're very, very smart. Now, what they did then is they did just that. They took a whole bunch of plants that were resistant to potato blight, and then they took a whole bunch of potato plants that were less resistant to potato blight, and then they analyzed the mineral composition of those different plants. And what they found was really cool. First of all, the first thing that they found is that if you had elevated levels of calcium, you were more resistant to potato blight. There was a positive relationship between the amount of calcium, obviously up until a point. You can't just calcify your plant and expect it. Well, I mean, it's not like it would grow on a calcified plant anyway, but to a point, right? If you increase the amount of calcium, then you increased its resistance to potato blight. So that's really, really interesting. So the researchers identified that calcium is a mineral of interest as a way of repelling something like potato blight. And so the next thing they want to do is like, okay, so we've identified calcium. So now let's see if maybe we could increase the fitness of a potato plant. We can increase its resistance to potato blight by exogenously giving it calcium. We take a little bit of calcium and we supplement the bacteria with this calcium, and then we can see if it's more resistant to potato blight. And what they found was really, really cool. If they added calcium to the plants exogenously, like I just said, similar type of thing occurred. As you increase the amount of calcium, obviously to a point, right, then it became more and more resistant to this potato blight. Now, the mechanism by which this happened, I don't want to dive into it too much, and I don't even know if they actually have it pinned down specifically yet, but regardless, what was really neat is that as the amount of calcium increased, these bacteria, the Ralstonia, if you'll excuse me, there we go, the Ralstonia, they weren't able to form these biofilms. So you may recall their biofilm is a whole bunch of bacteria that are kind of glommed on together, and it's really good as a way of attaching to things, as a way of resisting things like antibiotics. It's a way of really solidifying a toehold when they're trying to attack an organism, right? But when you had this supplemented calcium in the case of these plants, those biofilms weren't able to be formed, or to a much lesser degree. And what that did is that prevented the bacteria from gaining a toehold on the potato plant and allowed the potato plant to push back against any type of attack from the Ralstonia bacteria. So really, really cool stuff, all because of this calcium, right? Really, really neat stuff. So now as we move forward, right, this is going to be really, really useful information, not just for really, really large-scale farmers, right? Obviously, large-scale farmers are like, oh, sweet, I'll just dump a whole bunch of calcium on potato plants and then all the potato blight will be gone. But again, I want to focus in on the individual gardener, right? So you may be like, okay, how does this relate to eggshells, Dr. K? And the way it does is that eggshells are a really, really good source of calcium, actually, right? This is one reason why they're useful in something like compost, right? But again, focusing on the potato plants, the eggshell itself is a really awesome source of calcium. So if your potatoes look particularly blighty one day, all you gotta do is grab a mortar and pestle, if you have a mortar and pestle. Otherwise, just use whatever you have, and then grind up a whole bunch of eggshells, and then supplement your plant with that calcium, right? And then in theory, according to this paper, then it should increase the resistance of your potato plant to potato blight. Such a cool thing, and it's also super practical for those of us who are running around trying to grow potatoes, such as I, and possibly such as ye. So let's wrap this up and get out of here. Number one, people are gardening more and more in these United States and around the world, and in particular, millennials are gardening like crazy. Number two. There it is. Number two, plants and bacteria are having this ongoing arms race, right? Where plants are trying to get resistance to bacteria and bacteria are trying to figure out new ways to kill plants. Okay, so that's the second point. The third point is that as you increase, these researchers found that as you had more bacteria, as you had more calcium in the case of a potato plant, you became more resistant to the potato plant or the potato blight bacteria. Right, that's the third point. And finally, the fourth point is that researchers were able to exogenously add calcium to these potato plants, and it increased its fitness and increased its resistance to potato blight. And now you can do the exact same thing with your own little batch of eggshells. So really cool story. Again, it's important to note that even though bacteria are super useful and super wonderful and awesome and really cool, that sometimes, especially in the context of gardening, we need to be able to pare them back, or we need to be able to supplement and support our plants and things like this as a way of ensuring that they grow and everything. But anyway, that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will hopefully see you guys again next week on another episode of Short Stories of Bacteria. Hey everyone, thanks for watching that video. If you guys enjoyed it, if you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit that like, share, subscribe button, and I will hopefully see you guys in the next video. Later!